Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I'm going to cover some of the others today. Well, really, just I'll talk about Hickey Naily here in a second, and I'm going to talk about Kamala. I'm going to show you some great video from Kamala. But with Joe Biden doing his State of the Union tomorrow, I believe it's tomorrow. It's late. They've lowered expectations for him, right? Like he's just got to. I mean, he can be horrible, but if he doesn't have a major gaffe or doesn't poop his depends or wander around stage, it's a win. Like that's how sad and low the expectations are for the president of the United States. And the same thing with Trump. Like both sides, have lowered expectations because the other candidates, I just turned on the news or was watching some video and it was Hickey Naily, and I guess she won Washington D.C. And as soon as I hear her voice, it's just something about her. It's just very unlikable. With all these candidates and all these people in the news, like they're so unlikable. And so, like if just someone comes out that's just like halfway decent, I mean, it's just you say, all right, I dislike Trump and Biden, but who are you going to replace them with, right? Kamala and Nikki, right? So there's just such low expectations. There's not anybody who's just a reasonable, okay human being. They don't have to be great. Like these people are all pieces of boop. And so, but let's start here. This is Mika, like one of my viewers sent me this, I believe.
Joining us now, Professor of Political Science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Tom Schaller, and journalist and opinion writer Paul Waldman. Their new book, out tomorrow, is entitled White Rural Rage.
Whoa. White rural rage.
The threat to American democracy. And Tom, I'll start with you. Why are white rural voters a threat to democracy at this point? You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this, so we provide the receipts.
They're a threat to the country. White rural voters are a threat to the country, right? If you live out in the country, people in the country are just happier than city people. You understand this? Like, I've lived in both the city and in the country, and people in the country are just way happier. It's like it's so less stressful in the country, just by where you live, because you're closer to nature, and it's just the noise of the city, the stress. We know what happens in the city. You look at where all the mass shootings happen, where all the negative things happen. I mean, all the stuff that happens, it's always in the cities, right? There's crime in the countries, and there's crime in the country and rural areas, but everything happens in cities. And when it does happen in rural areas, it's usually in the urban area of the rural place. So people live out, and most people desire to live in the country in some capacity because you just do better there. That's where you're supposed to live. People are not supposed to live in cities. We're not colony-based people. We're not like animals. We're not like bees that live in hives and can be packed together. There's colony animals, right, that live in close proximity, live on top of each other. And people aren't supposed to be that way. We're more free-ranging type of creatures, animals. You see the way people have lived, yes, villages, small villages and things like this, but that's a lot different. Family-based villages and things, rural area, tribes and stuff, but not like big cities where there's, millions of people living on top of each other. And so this premise is just wrong from the get-go because there's a lot more anger in the city. And when you go to the city, you become angrier. Like you break down mentally and mental illness sets in. And not that there isn't mental illness in rural areas, but it's not the same, right? Because of that, just you have an advantage living in the country. Like you're blessed if you live in an area where you have more land, and suburban places as well, right?
It's in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, and anti-gay geodemographic group in the country. Second, they're the most conspiracist group. QAnon support and subscribers, election denialism, COVID denialism and scientific skepticism, Obama birtherism. Third, anti-democratic.
They're so dangerous. They're a danger to America.
sentiments. They don't believe in an independent press, free speech. They're most likely to say the president should be able to act unilaterally without any checks from Congress or the courts or the bureaucracy. They're also the most strongly white nationalist and white Christian nationalists. And fourth, they are most likely to.
Wait, they're Christians? Did you say that they're white Christian nationalists? So the meaning religion here, which of course religion sucks. I'm not a fan of religion, for my videos, but this is all stuff. If you were saying the same kind of thing on the right, you would be accused of some sort of racism or some sort of, it's okay to say anything about so-called conspiracy theorists. Like you can say anything about people who don't believe in the official story. We're a demographic that everyone knows the government lies and corporations lie and the media lies. I mean, it's, everyone knows that. But if you believe that and you post it online, you are a part of a group that they can basically treat you any kind of way, and it's okay because you're responsible for, not the people in power that have power, not the politicians, not the people who have money, not the, all of it, like all the religious power, whatever it is. It's individual people posting that they believe all these people are liars, and you're somehow the threat, right? Like you're the threat. Of course you are, because the truth will take down our system. I mean, not in a good way, because there's no backup plan. I've said this before. The truth community is purposeless because it's just a bunch of people who want to destroy something that there's no backup plan for. They think that they're going to change something, but you're not. You're going to destroy something without having some way to replace something to replace it with. And so it is, in that way, a threat to this evil system. And so that there's truth in this, but they're not saying that. Like they're not admitting that the truth will take this evil system down, and then there won't be anything to replace it with.
To excuse or justify violence as an acceptable alternative to peaceful public discourse.
So you mentioned a lot of negative factors about this demographic.
Of course, Mika's leading the way here. She's like, abysmal. So I saw an article about this. This person interviews Bernie Sanders. Here.
Made clear their dissatisfaction with this White House position on Israel and Gaza, as more than 100,000 voted uncommitted in the Democratic primary.
So Bernie Sanders comes from Jewish descent. And, Biden is better on Israel than Trump is, and the Republicans. Better on Palestine and Israel. But he's not great. But he's still better. And Bernie Sanders better than Biden. Confronting what's happening here, which is an atrocity, which we now see. It's, think about this. Began in October, 30,000 people dead, most of them women and children, and, civilians, and nothing to do with Hamas. And those people's lives are wrecked forever. Encroachment on their, they don't have food, they don't have electricity, they don't have water, they don't have, basic needs. They're now going on, what is it, October, November, December, January, February. So that's over 4 months, almost 5 months now. And it's like almost, half a year. And Israel is indicated they're not stopping. This is going to continue, and it's probably going to continue in other regions to such an extent it's been forgotten about. Like this has been something that's less and less talked about. It's not even going to be as we move into the political season here, it's not going to be a major, major campaign, it's not going to be campaigned on or talked about other than Trump endorsing and giving a blank check to green light or blank check to Israel, and Biden doing whatever he's doing, right? Biden's caught in the middle between the, sort of conservative Democrats, the middle of the road moderate Democrats, and the left. And so he's not going to want to talk about this, and they're going to just go into other things, right? And this is going to be about other issues. And, wars are like anything else. They're forgotten about. Like the initial acts of war, the initial things that get it going, make the news. But after a war just lingers on, we saw this with Iraq and Afghanistan and these various places, Vietnam. And Vietnam was more contentious because of the liberal left pushing against it, but it just fades from the news. People forget about it, right? Like it's just all right, whatever, the war. Yeah, there's a war going on, and that's what's happened. Like Israel's pushed back against all the forces that be saying to stop, right, and to make peace in some way, ceasefire, and they just said no, and people are like, all right, well, what are we going to do, right? America's not going to do sanctions against Israel.
Food and aid, they have apparently done that. Can you talk a little bit about how receptive the White House and the administration have been to outside pressure?
Well, I think, for a start, this is something, Alex, they've been thinking about for a while, because what they see, what you see, what I see, is almost an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of children facing starvation. We're talking about Israeli bombs of making it impossible for humanitarian aid to get to places that is needed.
Let's look into again. He could be sort of left cover, but Bernie's like coming out strong here. I mean, at least this could be an act, whatever. But he's one of the few people here who was. That's what should happen, right?
That the borders are being blockaded and aid is unable to get through. So I think what the president is doing is an important step forward, but we need to do more. We need to tell Netanyahu and his right-wing government that they're going to have to open those borders. The United States of America, and I think the rest of the world, is not going to allow hundreds of thousands of kids to starve to death. So we need a new approach to Israel. For many, many years, we have given them a lot of money. Recently, there was a vote. I voted against it to give them another $14 billion. My view, not another nickel for Netanyahu's government if he's going to continue this wholesale slaughter of the Palestinian people.
That's the thing I can't really reconcile, right? We're airdropping aid at the same time as the U.S. is sending weapons of war over to Israel.
Like, she sucks. Like, they're right about this thing, which is, weird. But I've covered her before. She's so, she's just a sucky MSNBC host. But they're, for whatever reason, this is where they're getting, this one issue, at least sort of right.
I mean, how do you reconcile that? Is the right hand not talking to the left hand?
You can't reconcile it. It's totally absurd. And on top of that, look, the airdrops are very important. But that is not as important as opening up the borders, because you're going to need hundreds and hundreds of trucks every single day. And our message to Netanyahu, you know what? You're not going to get another nickel unless you open those borders and prevent the starvation, which is imminent.
You say it's your message to Netanyahu, but I wonder if it's not also the message to President Biden, right? I mean, I have to read this passage because I think, we don't cover Gaza every day. It is an ongoing, appalling situation. And this is what's happening for people who have tuned this out for domestic politics, which, of course, are important as well. But listen to this. It was hunger that drove Ibrahim al-Rifi from his house in Gaza at 2 in the morning on Thursday. It had been months since he could find bread for his wife and daughters in war-ravaged northern Gaza. Flour sold for close to $1,000 a bag. And even the animal feed many had turned to was running out. Some people are eating grass, according to the United Nations.
It is an unprecedented disaster, Alex. I mean, it makes my stomach turn when you think about it. And by the way, there are children right now who are suffering from severe malnutrition, who will suffer permanent damage. If all the food in the world came in tomorrow, they have already been permanently damaged.
I've said this before, and there was a, Clinton's Secretary of State, whatever her name was, Madeleine Albright. For some reason, I'm in the editing portion, and my computer didn't copy or didn't record the audio off the computer, which is a disaster for what I do here. But either way, it's Madeleine Albright, and she says this about economic sanctions.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice but we think the price is worth it.
So I didn't understand this before because economic sanctions sounds better than war. But economic sanctions, what they're trying to do to Russia, what they're doing, to various countries, kill children. Children starve. Like, that's what happens. When there's economic sanctions, children, more than anybody else, die of starvation. And what's happening in Israel is even worse because they've cut off everything to this country. This isn't just, it's war and economic sanctions. And they've closed the border. So there's no aid that can get through, and people don't have, the things they need to live. So they're being, starved. And kids are going to die of just starvation, which is probably worse than dying in a, in war where it's immediate, right? Where, bomb hits you and you're there's no pain and suffering. I mean, I'm not saying that's great, but dying of starvation that takes months, and then the pain of the families watching, members of their family die of starvation, all that stuff, right? And of course, babies and things like this, mothers not being able to have enough nutrition to produce like breast milk and things or whatever. And so that's what's happening here. And Biden is allowing it to happen, and Trump and Hickey Haley, are saying it's a great thing and there's no problem at all. Like, that's how bad the Republicans are. That's how bad, like, again, lowering expectations, right? When people suck so bad that, you just accept whatever's, when all you have is a bunch of pieces of boop, Bernie Sanders looks good, right? This is how bad it is. RFK Jr. looks good. Not in this case because he's so pro-Israel. But when people suck so bad, even someone who's just willing to flirt with the truth looks great.
So the word has got to go out that we must demand a total change in what Netanyahu is doing. We got to put an end to this bloody war right now. Netanyahu and the Israeli government have got to start supporting the concept of a two-state solution so that maybe there will finally be peace in that region.
It seems like political pressure might be one thing to get the administration to take a more aggressive posture vis-a-vis Netanyahu. And I wonder what you made of the results from the Michigan primary earlier this week. Over 100,000 people voting uncommitted as an effective protest vote against this administration's policy.
Well, it tells me, and I think it tells the White House, that there are large numbers of young people, large numbers of minority people, large numbers of Americans who are sick and tired of the slaughter of the Palestinian people. And again, this is not some distant thing. This is with our tax dollars.
But also what's happened with the Ukraine, right? Like, this is, it was a war that was going to be lost. And America's supporting the Ukrainians, and they're suffering. They've just been slaughtered because they're outmatched. And, it was inevitably going to end this way, and American money is being sent over there to just a failed attempt for whatever reason to weaken Russia. It's failed. Like, it failed. It was these neocons who in power under George W. Bush, who made a deal with Biden. I think it was a deal to sabotage Trump and give Biden the election if they got to run the foreign policy. America's foreign policy. They're very pro-Israel as well. Anti-Russia, these things. And they failed. They failed before. The neocons have just failed every time. They failed at all these wars, all this stuff. They made a lot of money for themselves. They made him a lot of money, like Halliburton money, rebuilding Dick Cheney, these things. They did well financially, but they've destroyed America and these other countries, caused so much suffering, and they're just wormy people, right? So the Hammer guy interviews, look at him. Look at his face. Look at his effing face. Of course, this dope. He gets teary-eyed at the end of one of these things. I don't know which. I have two of them up. Somebody sent me an inferior clip, so I went to the source. Somebody taking a clip and put it on Instagram or something. But let's get into it here.
The situation in Israel now for the administration seems to be trying to find the balance between Israel's right to defend itself as a country.
It's not defending itself. Like, stop even talking about that. You worm. Like, look at this. Like, just look at him. Like he's just completely ghouled it up, right?
Taken from the day of the horror of October 7, where, as you know, 1,200 people were massacred, many of them young people who were simply going to a concert, where women were assaulted and abused. Our position has always been that Israel has a right to defend itself, without any question.
You know, she and Hickey Nally, I mean, all of them, like, they're all like this. But there's something unlikable about them, particularly. Like, you hear them talk, and the first, like, just the tone of their voice, like, there's just, they radiate insincerity and, you know, whatever. Like, Trump and Biden are dopes, and they suck in their own level. But they're funny because they're so, I mean, they're old, and they're, like, they're stupid, and they're whatever. You know, they're humorous, and so you can at least watch something like it's a train wreck, but at least it's funny, and there's going to be gaffes, and you know, for my purposes here, where I talk about the system imploding and the degradation of the American system. But these are people like immediately, if this is your teacher, and she comes in front of the class and starts talking, and it's like, oh God, I got to tune her out, like just. There's just something about her. And now you say the same thing for Hickey Nally. Obviously there's other people. There's like, you could say the same thing about Ron DeSantis, although he's just weird too. But there's these, more Gavin Newsom's another example of this. Polished politicians who they're not. She's not a good public speaker, but they're better than Trump or Biden. Like there's less gaffes. There's a lot of gaffes with Kamala because she's weird. But they're just, they're a little bit younger. Their minds are a little bit fresher, and they're able to articulate things in a better way than Trump or Biden. And, they're more aware they're younger. They're just more aware of what young people and, the way they're just not stuck in the past, right? But like they're just so unlikable. They're so fake. Like they're such posers, right?
And how it does so matters. And as I have said many times, and I think we know that far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And it is important then that, and we have made clear our perspective on this, that that there be a lessening of the intensity and more precision around how Israel goes after Hamas and the leadership of Hamas.
Well, this isn't defending itself. This is a land grab. Like, stop lying about this part. You can say whatever about the first thing. Whatever happened with the first thing. The initial event that got Israel to do so. Like I've said this before, nobody goes and punches a lion in the face. No sane person, right? Walks up to a lion or a bear or, even a bobcat or a raccoon and says, let's fight, right? Like, or a beehive. Like, no one goes and walks up and kicks a hornet's nest. Like, a insane person, right? There's nobody that would do that. And countries don't do that. Like, once in a while you get a crazy leader of a country, but that's how they like to frame it. But countries people don't like to get their ass kicked, right? When you know that you're outmatched. You see this in the animal kingdom. Like sometimes you get like a honey badger or some small animal fights off a bigger animal just on their ferocity. But the Palestinian people have been getting their ass kicked by Israel because they don't have an army. Like it's already been lost. Like it's already been established that the Palestinians don't have an army and the Palestinians have no friends, at least in terms of like America. The support, the patronage that America gives Israel is, it's, you can't even describe it you can't, there's nothing to compare it to. The amount of money that Americans give to Israel and the way that we support Israel, there's no other example of that anywhere in the world. And the Palestinians don't have that in any capacity. So you have the most powerful, richest nation supporting Israel, and Israel has a military, and the Palestinians have nothing. I covered this in my earlier videos on this subject, right? And so what's their motivation for doing this? This big event. Like, there's just doesn't make any sense. Like, without knowing all the details and without, the mainstream media lying all these things, why would Palestinians want to get their asses kicked? I mean, why would the Palestinians want their kids to starve? Like, they know what Israel's going to do, right? You know what they're going to do. Like, they know more than we do, right? They live it. They live in fear of it. And so they knew what was going to happen. Why would they do that in the first place, right? And so this whole thing is, it's a lie, right? The whole thing's a lie.
And as you know, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin have paid now repeated trips to the region to make clear our position on that. But we do also need to focus on what is happening now toward what is possible and should be possible the day after, as we call it. Lawrence, as you know, I was in Dubai recently, meeting with a number of leaders, including many Arab leaders, to talk about our commitment as the United States to a two-state solution and a commitment to doing the hard work that will require.
Israel's position, Zionist positions, is that God promised them this land. Evangelical Christians, neocons, also believe God promised Israel to the Jews. This is Israel. The blue part is Israel. It's part of Egypt, part of Saudi Arabia, part of Iraq. I just covered this in my last video. Part of Syria. It has lots of, look at the ocean here. There's beautiful oceans here, Persian Gulf. It has all these, oil, and there's oil in Iraq. Half of Iraq would be part of Israel. They would have oil. There's the Palestinians right out here, where the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, right off the coast, there's all this like natural gas and oil and stuff like this. The resources, Israel would be one of the richest countries in the world. It would have all this stuff here, right? It would be like a place a destination for vacations because of the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea and things like that. The trade that happens through the Persian Gulf and these seas, and then all the resources they would have. And they would be a superpower. They would probably be, rival to America. If they were able to, God promised them this land. And all these countries would be crumbled, like the way that Israel would get this land is if Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey and all these countries were somehow, crushed in some way. Like Israel would just be, emboldened by, I don't know how it would happen. But if you believe in the biblical, and I don't, right? Because, it's all, God doesn't promise you anything. Like nothing's promised. Like animals have to compete for their territory every day. Every day you're competing for your territory. Go look out the window. Like it's springtime. We have red-winged blackbirds who are looking for a mate, right? And they're competing. Watch them chase each other, right? We have hummingbirds like that are, they're not here yet, but they will be soon. And we have a hummingbird feeder. And there's one that sits out and tries to chase all the hummingbirds away from the hummingbird feeder, right? Like they set up territories. Animals are territorial, and they have to fight off the other animals to keep their territory. Things happen, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and they have to relocate. This is just constant. Like nothing is ever given to you. No land is promised to you. It's not your land. It's never your land. We have this illusion of land ownership through these unnatural artificial governments. That's nothing to do with God or nature. But God doesn't promise you shit, right? There's no promise. Okay, so let's fast forward to the end here.
Relate directly or indirectly to our national security. And you and I, Lawrence, have talked about it many times. When I was in the Senate for the 4 years I was there, one of my favorite experiences as a senator was being on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I'll tell you why. That meeting took place in a SCIF, which is a secure room where no one could bring in their cell phones. There was no public, no press, just us. And people would then walk in that room, regardless of their political party, and take off their jackets, have a cup of coffee, roll up their sleeves, and not act as Democrats or Republicans, but act as Americans who should prioritize first and foremost our national security and the best interest of the people of our country in terms of ensuring that we are standing for our principles.
All 4 years, when you ran for president and you polled at less than 1% of Democrats, less than 1% of Democrats wanted to vote for her. And Joe Biden was the leading candidate. Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders. These were people that were crushing her, right? I mean, I have Klobuchar and Biden, and who else was out there? So the woman Trump calls Elizabeth Warren. They were crushing her. Like she had 1%. She had to quit. She didn't even get one vote in a primary. But Biden made this proclamation he was going to pick a woman, and then he said he'd pick a woman of color. And so, like, she was the one that sort of made the most sense for him. But, like, she's unlikable. Like, she's not somebody. Okay, so then she talks about abortion.
Resolved in November of next year, because I do know that the American people fight for freedom and believe in the woman's right to make decisions about her own body. But understand, every day until then, there are women suffering in our country in horrible ways. And look, let me tell you, there's going to be a split screen on this too in November of 24, to your point about the election. There's really going to be, of all the issues we've discussed so far, none of them are binary. This one is. November of 24, binary. On the one hand, you're going to have the folks who are standing, such as President Joe Biden and me, saying we trust women to be able to make a decision about what is in their best interest, and women can trust us to protect their fundamental freedoms. And on the other hand, you're going to have folks who want a national ban and have the gall to tell women who are even survivors of rape or incest that they don't have the right to make decisions about what happens to their body next. So I think there's going to be a clear choice on this issue and so many others next year in November.
Yeah, the women who can't, don't have permission to kill their fetuses, right? I've talked about this. Like, it's not it's such a complicated issue because America is a disaster of immorality and lies, right? And if they get rid of abortion, one, it wouldn't stop abortion. If they made it illegal, then there'd be illegal abortions. But two, all these unwanted kids would have, we're talking about tens of millions of them added to an economy already, and the crime and all these things. These kids would, kids who grow up in situations where women feel like they have to abort their babies usually are not going to have a good situation. Most of the time it's going to be in poverty and whatever else, right? Oftentimes young single moms, whatever. And so, like, America had to survive. That's one of the things that fuels America's, we're barely hanging on by a thread anyway, in terms of the economy, in terms of poverty, in terms of crime, these things. It would have put America over the edge, right? And so it is a systemic problem. It's something that has to happen, abortions, to keep America going. Like, that's something people on the right don't want to deal with, the pro-lifers. That America, that they're 100% dependent on, needs to do evil stuff. Both the left and the right don't want to deal with this. Democrats and Republicans, they want to blame one side or the other. But all of us should be aware of, for us to sustain our lifestyle, for America to provide us with our lifestyle, we have to do evil things that hurts kids all around the world. Children are suffering because of our lifestyle and the resources that we consume. And then, of course, wildlife and, whatever it is that you love, whether it be animals, whether it be nature, whether it be, children, whatever, whatever is the thing for you, innocent creatures, whether they be babies, whether they be trees, whether they be, animals, whatever it might be, right? That has to suffer for us to have our lifestyle. And it's something people don't want to deal with, like all of us. We're all in on that, right? Like, we want our lifestyle, but we don't want to know what it takes to get it, right? Kids suffering in sweatshops and countries and things like this. Nobody wants to see that. Like, nobody wants to confront that stuff that you're enjoying right now, whether it be your, devices, whether it be your, food that comes from another country, whether it be any number of things. The suffering that goes into providing that for you. They're suffering on the other end of our pleasures, right? Like, it's just like, and that, like, nobody wants to see that, right? Like, we're enjoying stuff that, that comes from the suffering of other people or the world or the, the environment or whatever it might be. And, being honest about that. Like, the first step is just to be honest. and that the system collapsing isn't a solution either, because that involves like a complete breakdown of everything, right? And so we're all kind of caught in this trap where, it is too big to fail and it has to fail. Like for the world to move forward, to people move forward on a spiritual level and stop, the moral hemorrhaging, the ethical hemorrhaging, the stupidity, the idiocracy that's happening, the system has to collapse. And like, that's unthinkable, right? So everything that America's doing now is lowering expectations. Like kids today don't have the expectation that you were given for your life, right? And the expectations for the kind of people that are leaders and their characters and what kind of people they are, what kind of levels of competence they have. Trump's stupid lie about making America great again. Like America was never great in the sense of, it's all right. I mean, it's great in the sense that we have the strongest military and the best economy. But that isn't great. Like that's, it's, think about the rich people that you know in your life, or the publicly rich people, even the publicly successful people. They're not great. They're actually pretty self-involved. I mean, people with lots and lots of money or hoarding money, it's a mental illness. You have $1 billion. Again, you can be a multimillionaire, millionaire or something, and, have a reasonably normal life. But you're a billionaire or a trillionaire or something like that, it's just obscene amount of wealth, right? And with more and more comforts, the less and less you become a spiritual person. Like you lack spirituality. Successful people are often spiritually deprived because you're out of balance. You're putting too much effort into being successful. And really successful people who are great at something, like really great at one thing, they put everything into that one thing and neglect other parts of their life, their families, and it's just, you only have so much energy and time. I've covered this extensively in this and my spiritual videos. And so, great is, I mean, you can say something's great or somebody's great, but usually means that they suck at everything else, right? Or they're bad or, mediocre at lots of other things. And so greatness is an illusion. And America was great in the sense that it had the strongest military and best economy. But it's a limited period of time. And it neglects all the other suffering that's happening to sustain your lifestyle. To be rich, there's got to be a lot of poor people. Wealth is defined by contrast, right? Happiness is defined by contrast. Everything's defined by contrast. So if you're rich, that means there has to be poor, right? Like if you're wealthy, that means that other people have to be in poverty, because wealth is comparative. You're comparing your wealth to the wealth of, everyone else, and everyone else has to be, much lower levels, and there's going to be, people in the middle, there's going to be impoverished people, then they're going to be ultra wealthy. And that's how our system is. And a system like that is always going to be based on suffering and slavery of one type or another. But in all that, so America wasn't great, and Trump's a liar, but, there was a time where there was an American dream, a dream that I don't particularly buy into or believe in as I grew up, but at least we had that dream, and on the material level, and these kids growing up today don't have that dream because there's been lower expectations. And you see it here with these leaders, like Joe Biden just has to go out tomorrow and not poop himself and not, implode on stage, and where everything else has been accepted, and they continuously lie about it like he's okay. The guy's had dementia forever, and it doesn't matter because we've accepted that that's okay. We've, given into that, right? Like let's say you're in a relationship and your significant other hits you, could be a man or a woman, right? Or something. A woman like does something to you, whatever hurts you as a person. Like a woman might cheats on her husband, or a man cheats on her, or, whatever hurts you personally. Something that really made you feel bad. And you don't get divorced. And you just accept it. And then that's part of your marriage now. The person just keeps on doing it because you've accepted it. Like you've lowered your expectations of what your husband or wife is willing to, how they're willing to treat you. And so like that's once you've lowered expectations, and then they can just roll out, Agenda 31 housing, and these kids have very limited expectations of their lives, and as long as they have the internet and something to, do on the internet and whatever it is, they're cool, and so you see it everywhere, right? The lower expectations. There are a few more things here, and I want to get to some comments. Just a few things that are left to cover here. My White House, Mission Impossible. How I, the CIA's disguised division chief, deceived the Secret Service, infiltrated the Oval Office, and shocked the president by peeling off my face mask. Jonah Mendez was chief of CIA's disguised division, a branch of the agency charged with outfitting secret agents operating abroad. And they had lifelike latex masks and sophisticated technology like Mission Impossible. And she went into with a fully animated ethnic and gender change mask ready for the runway. I changed into a man's suit and donned the mask of a black male, adding matching skin-tight latex gloves that were precisely painted the same skin color, including the veins. And so this is just, a whole thing that happened there. And that's what they're into. That's your taxpayer dollars at work. How I hate China controls all our politicians. They make them touch the Great Wall of China and swear allegiance to CCP. Wonderful meme here. And there they all are, right? Various presidents, all pledging their allegiance to China, wearing the Chinese hat. Okay, so I haven't done comments in a while, but I have, here, let's get to it. A couple today that came in. There's an old one I want to track down somewhere. Let's go with this one first. In no particular order. Verbal violence is not funny. And the not is capitalized. And it's a short video where Trump says to Caitlin Collins, "You are a nasty person." Verbal violence is not funny. Words are just words. And feelings being hurt are usually emotions being hurt. And it's usually your ego being hurt. Now, there's a difference between being hurt on a heart level. When you hurt somebody's heart. And it's very perceptible if you do the Sajmarg meditation that I've been doing for years. You can feel when you've hurt somebody else's heart. It sucks. You feel it and you feel immediately bad, right? Even if you're like not the nicest person in the world, it just feels bad, and you feel how other people, you just feel it. And a person's ego being hurt is usually, anger. There could be some fear or whatever it might be. Ego-related things, gut-related things. But when you hurt somebody's heart, there's a deep inner pain, right? And they might not react in a way where they say something to you, or, they react where they, fire back. I mean, if they then transition to an emotional state as opposed to a feeling state, right? Where they go from being, hurt on a heart level to being angry at you, like then reacting on an egotistical level. But, the feeling that they have is, it sucks, and you don't want to hurt people's hearts. But most of anything else is hurting people's egos, which isn't really a bad thing. People's egos being hurt isn't horrible because, the ego sucks. I mean, the ego's, especially, your ego can be divinized in some way. Your ego can be something that's made into something that aligns with your soul. But, that's very rare. And right now, people's egos are just out of control. Things that hurt your ego are just, a little dose of reality that you're not as great as you think you are, right? And so this idea about words as violence, and I'm not advocating for, mocking people like I do here, or, people, all the things that are done out there, insulting people or whatever, but, it's no big deal. It's only the fact that people's are so ego-driven, or the egos are so fragile, is that, and they're psychologically fragile, that words are now considered violence, right? You can have, words of hate and, threats and things like this that's something different. But if there's no, like is a condition people have to be in. And anyways, I mean, just, it's just a stupid comment. And then there's this one. Paul is a shill for racial dynamics. He says he's Italian, like that isn't white, and talks too much about the Indians. Sad to say, you're too stupid to understand the word shill. It's overused in the truth community, and there's so many stupid people in the truth community that aren't capable of critical thinking skills, so they don't belong here. And they're using words like shill, and shill's too big a word. It's a one-syllable word with an easy definition. A shill is somebody who, like, let's say there's a snake oil salesman, and the person, or there's a priest, or one of these fake miracle workers, some religious minister or something, and is healing people, and they have some guy in the audience on crutches who can't walk or in a wheelchair. And the person stands up and walks, and everyone goes, oh my God, it's a miracle. But the guy's a shill, and the guy could always walk. The guy's in the wheelchair is somebody who could always walk, right? Or a snake oil salesman will sell something and cure somebody. But what a shill means is that you're on the payroll. Okay, so whose payroll am I on? Racial dynamics? Am I on racial dynamics payroll? Like that, like you just don't know what you're talking about. You're a moron, right? Like an easier explanation, Paul is a shill for racial dynamics. He says he's Italian, like that isn't white. So this is a white person who's mad because I'm not white nationalist clown like many of these right-wing truthers, right? I don't even consider myself Italian, and I'm not. I'm Italian, Irish, German, and Albanian. And I'm those, that's my heritage. And I have some genetic tendencies because of that, right? I have things from all of those different peoples, European peoples, who are, would be considered Caucasian, but Italians are a lot darker, say, than Germans, depending on, just all of it, right? Just the placement of where people live. But in all that, right, like I don't think of myself in any of those ways. I don't think of myself, people who define themselves by their race and by their culture and their family name. I don't even think of myself in terms of my family, right? Like I think of myself as in terms of like a spiritual person, and then just my egotistical attitudes towards everybody else and people in general. But in terms of like any of those things, I don't belong to a group. Like I don't have some kind of group identity. Like I don't root for Italians or Irish people or, Germans or Albanians, because I'm part that. Like I don't have some, oh my God, that guy's Italian. And I have some predisposition towards liking Italians. In fact, the people I would most identify with are people who live in the northeast part of the country, and I don't want to live there. Like I would never go back and live in Connecticut. I don't get along with the people I grew up with. I much prefer to live in other areas. Like people in every other part of the country are nicer. They're just less stressed out. I prefer other places than living in, the Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts area. But in all that, I'm not taking money from any of these things, I'd say. A better way to look at it is I have an opinion that disagrees with yours. And I don't agree with you and your group. That doesn't make me a shill. And using the term shill wrongly, then you just, you kind of like just embarrass the whole truth community with your stupidity. Like you don't know what you're talking about. Like you don't realize what the word shill is, then you shouldn't be even commenting. Like you have nothing to offer anybody because you're just not smart. It's not just not being smart, it's your level of consciousness. Because all I'm saying is things that disagree with you. And you might not like those things. And you could leave a comment saying you disagree, but I've already said I don't even remember what's in my video, so it's pointless. So it's you just venting, you can just stop watching. That would be the best solution. Because if you think I'm a shill, what was the term you used? Let me go back here. You think I'm a shill to racial demographics, right? Like, what? You mean you're saying that I'm woke? Like, what are you saying? Like, it's just, and who's paying me? Like woke people? Like, where am I getting my funding from? Right? Like, just like think about things before you talk, and then don't talk, because what you're going to say is stupid. So the other comment, I want to just comment on it here. I should comment on one of my other channels. This is from my, I'm doing a lot of stuff with the exposing heartfulness. And here's the comment here. So having trouble opening it. Here it is here. Unnatural color, magenta, please. It is ungodly. And here's the picture. I'll show you the picture of the color that's there. And so this is, my wife and I were at the beach. And it was like, there was a hurricane. Like, it didn't really hit, but there was like weird weather and a hurricane. And it was sunset. And this was the colors that were there. And it was quite significant. Like, I'll put a bunch of the pictures here. Now, my camera was set on vivid, so it picked up more of the color, but that just means it's picking up more than your eye does. And, I have it on a light set of vivid. All my pictures have vivid setting. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't call it a filter, but it's, those pictures of the canyon that I show sometimes, and I'm not going to show them here because, whatever, but if you take pictures with vivid, this is what I learned about it. It picks up colors that your eyes can't see. But my wife and I could see these colors. We were like, oh my God, the color's amazing. It was like all around us. And it was because there was some sort of weird weather event going on. And I've seen the sunset, multiple times. I've taken pictures. It's a place my wife and I go to. We go to the ocean. And, this was the pictures. And the pictures that were there, and it was amazing. Amazing colors. And, the camera didn't change it to magenta. And so, like, just stupid stuff. Like, people, they're stupid stuff. Right? I mean, this was an actual picture. There was actual, like, experience that I had where the color of the sky was just amazing because there was some kind of a weather event. And I don't know what caused it, but we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's a documentation for us of that event. It's a little bit more enhanced because of the iPhone, but we saw all the things that you see here. It's just not as vivid. And I want to say this also, this picture here, I'm facing away from the sunset. And this is early on in the process. And you see it picks up violet. Like, this is, ultraviolet, which would be, this one side of the spectrum, something you can't see. And then the color violet. The other side, which is reddish, right? The other side was facing the camera towards the sunset. You see red and orange. And, a reddish, this is on one side of the prismatic, whatever it is. This is from the hurricane that was in 2022 of October. And it really didn't hit this area. Like, we didn't get the hurricane. But there was a condition. The hurricane was hitting, I forget what part of how far away it was, the hurricane was hitting. But this was the sunset on that night. And my wife and I were like, wow, this is amazing. And so again, just like stupidity. Anyways. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramount, definitely born for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.